Alright, this is function table practice number 1. So if you have the companion resource that goes along with it, we're going to do the first 3 problems. That should give us enough where you guys can finish the rest of the assignment. Now, for some of you, you may not be familiar with this word function. You may have heard these tables called input-output tables. They are basically the same thing. But as we move up to higher level math, we want to start using those algebraic terms. So function is a term from algebra, and a function is a type of an equation. So we're just starting to use those terms. So as we do these, I will refer to the tables as both function tables and input-output tables. All right. So number 1 is y equals 8x. Excuse me. And I've got x, y, got 8, 0, 6, 7, and 3 for my x values. Now, what I'm going to do here, and if you're following along, you might want to pause the video for just a second to copy this down if you don't have the resource that we're using. I'm actually going to go back through and I'm going to change, and I'm going to use some different colors so that we can see very clearly what's happening. So this is number 1. If you want to copy it down, go ahead and hit pause now. If you've already got it, just let it keep playing. I'm actually going to erase it, and I'm going to rewrite it using the different colors. So what we're going to do is we're going to have our x always equal, or always be blue, and we're going to have our y always be red. So we're going to go y equals, and then my constants, or the numbers that don't change, and I'm actually going to do the equals in black also. We're going to leave those in black. So remember, a constant is a number that in an equation it stays the same every time. So in this case, my constant will be 8. Do my x in blue. So when I set up my table, we can very clearly see the difference. Now, if you're used to your input-output table, x is always going to be your input, and y is always going to be your output. So we've got 8, 0, 6, 7, and 3 are going to be our inputs. So for each of these, according to my equation, I'm going to multiply my input by 8. And that's it. That's all I have to do for this. So for the first one, and I'll write this one out. I'm not going to write all of these out, but I will write this one out just so you can kind of see it. So for this first one, if I'm doing it off to the side here, so you can see my steps, y is going to equal 8 times my input, which in this case is 8. So y is going to equal 8 times 8. So then my output will be y equaling 8 times 8 gives me 64. So my output is 64. Now, for a lot of these, especially if it's just a simple one-stepper like this one where you're just multiplying by a number, most of these you should be able to do in your head. You should be able to just go down the line and say 8 times 0 is 0. 8 times 6 is 48. 8 times 7 is 56. 8 times 3 is 24. So for each of these, all I did was I substituted whatever my input was for x in my equation, and then I calculated 8 times whatever my input was to give me my output. All right, let's go on to number 2. Number 2, y is going to equal 5 times x minus 4. Alright, so my inputs for x are going to be 1, 5, 6, 9, and 3. Now for this one I am going to write out all of these. So I'm going to have to do them one at a time because I don't have enough space on my board. So I'm going to use this space over here. I'm going to write them out. Then we'll write our output down. Then I'll have to erase it to make room for the next one. Okay? So for the first one, y is going to equal 5 times 1, because my first input for x is 1, minus 4. So then y will equal 5 times 1 gives me 5, and then minus 4. So y is going to be 1 in this case. So when x is 1, y is 1. Okay, let's go on to the 5. Now I'm actually going to keep my y equals here because every single one of these is going to require the same number of steps. You'll see that as we go along. So 5 times 5, because 5 is my x input this time. 5 is my x input, minus 4. So I start out by multiplying 5 times 5, which gives me 25. Subtract 4. 25 minus 4 gives me 21. So when x is 5, y equals 21. Okay, let's go on to our next one. So in this case, our input, our x is 6, so we're going to multiply 5 times 6, and then subtract 4. So 5 times 6 gives me 30. I need to rewrite. And then 30 minus 4 gives me 26. So when x is 6, y is 26. Okay. I left this part of the equation because, as we've seen, that part of the equation isn't changing. The only thing that's changing is what I'm multiplying 5 by at the beginning. So I'm going to leave the rest of my equation, and then I'm going to plug in my x. So my next x, my next input is 9. 5 times 9 gives me 45. Then I have to subtract my 4. 45 minus 4 gives me 41. So when x is 9, y equals 41. Alright, last one. So for this one, my input is 3. So I'm going to substitute 3 for x. So I'm left with 5 times 3 minus 4. So I'm going to multiply 5 times 3 first, which gives me 15. Then subtract 4. 15 minus 4 gives me 11. So when x is 3, y equals 11. And on to number 3. Now number 3 is actually going to be a pretty easy one. So I'm actually going to keep my input-output table here, so I don't have to rewrite it. And for this one, y is going to equal x plus 5. Okay, so my inputs for this one are 0, 8, 5, 3, and 4. Now this one I don't have to write out, and if you have done these a little bit and you've practiced these some already, then most of these you should be able to spit out in your head for these simple one-step problems, because all I'm going to do is take my input, my x, and I'm just going to add 5 to it to get y, to get my output. So I'm going to write out the first one just so you can see it, but then after that we're just going to do them in our head. So in my first problem, my input is 0, so I've substituted 0 for x, and now I'm just going to add 5. So y equals 0 plus 5, which just gives me 5. Alright, so again, I'm not going to rewrite the rest of these, but we're just going to go through them real quick. Alright, so for my next input, x is equal to 8, so 8 plus 5 gives me 13. For my next input, x is 5, so 5 plus 5 gives me 10. For my next input, x is 3, so 3 plus 5 gives me 8. And then for my last input, x equals 4, so 4 plus 5 gives me 9.